Welcome, friends. You're on the mindful path, where ancient wisdom meets modern insight. Imagine a 5-year-old child who remembers the name of a town they've never been to, the names of people they've never met, and how they died. Now picture scientists, real, credentialed researchers, not only listening, but confirming every detail. This isn't a fantasy. This is documented. Today on Mindful Path, we explore the fascinating bridge between ancient Buddhist wisdom and modern science. What if rebirth isn't superstition, but evidence-based reality? Stay with us, because what you're about to hear could transform how you see life, death, and what may come after. Where do humans come from and go? In Western philosophy and religion, this question tends to lead toward two primary camps, the theistic perspective and the materialist perspective. These represent two contrasting worldviews, both of which have deeply influenced modern culture, science, ethics, and politics. However, Buddhism approaches this fundamental human inquiry with a perspective that challenges both. Let's start with the first two paradigms, creationism and materialism. Theistic view, divine creation and eternal soul. In the theistic model, prominent in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and other religious systems, humans are seen as creations of a divine being or force. For example, in Christianity, the book of Genesis outlines how God created man in his own image. Humans are born once, live a finite life, and after death, depending on moral behavior and divine judgment, their souls either ascend to heaven, descend into hell, or rest in some other divine realm. This idea places a heavy emphasis on moral accountability and a singular life experience. There is a beginning, an end, and a final destination. It implies a linear understanding of time and existence. Powerful global figures like Pope Francis uphold this view as part of their theological worldview. The belief in divine creation and an eternal soul provides the backbone for major institutions, churches, legal codes based on morality, and philosophical discussions on free will and purpose. The idea is intuitive to many and provides comfort. You were made for a reason, and your life has a unique, non-repeatable purpose. Yet this belief does not answer certain philosophical and experiential dilemmas. For instance, why are people born into such drastically different circumstances? Why is a child born into poverty in a war-torn country while another is born as the child of a billionaire like Elon Musk? If a soul is newly created at birth, how do we explain such immense disparity at the point of origin? Materialist view, biological birth and death. At the other end of the spectrum lies materialism. In this worldview, human life is a purely biological event. We are the result of the fusion of sperm and egg. Our personality, behavior, and consciousness are seen as functions of the brain. Death is the end, total annihilation of the individual. This perspective is embraced in scientific fields, particularly in neuroscience, biology, and psychology. Prominent voices like Richard Dawkins and the late Stephen Hawking embodied this view. According to this logic, evolution through natural selection explains human traits and development. There's no soul, no rebirth, no afterlife, just genetic mutations, environmental factors, and cognitive adaptations. Figures like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates often operate within a materialist framework when approaching problems. They use logic, data, and reason. Their contributions to technological and medical advances have undeniably changed the world, but they also often neglect or outright reject metaphysical questions like, where did we come from and where are we going, in favor of more practical concerns. Materialism also struggles with certain gaps. For instance, it cannot fully explain consciousness, often referred to as the hard problem in philosophy. If everything about a human being is simply biochemical, why do people have complex inner experiences? Where do creativity, love, and intuition come from? Why do some children display prodigious talents without any training, like Mozart composing music at age 5? Buddhist perspective, rejecting both theism and materialism. Buddhism offers a radically different model. It does not accept the idea of a creator God, nor does it believe life ends with the dissolution of the body. Instead, Buddhism presents the doctrine of Samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In this model, the human being is a temporary expression of karmic forces. There is no permanent, unchanging soul, Atman, but rather a stream of consciousness that continues from one life to the next, shaped by karma, intentional actions performed by body, speech, or mind. This idea is neither theistic nor materialistic. It's empirical and conditional. You exist now as the result of countless causes and conditions, extending beyond this life. You are born into your current form not because God willed it, or because random molecules collided in a meaningless way, but because your past actions in this life and previous ones created conditions ripe for this birth. Imagine a global figure like Barack Obama. His intelligence, charisma, and leadership didn't appear out of nowhere. From a Buddhist perspective, these are karmic imprints developed over lifetimes, refined mental qualities that ripened in this existence. Similarly, the suffering experienced by individuals like Nelson Mandela in his early life was not random. It could be interpreted as the ripening of past karma, endured with wisdom, ultimately transforming him into a world-renowned symbol of peace and forgiveness. Buddhism avoids moral absolutism and instead proposes a law of ethical causation, karma, that operates impersonally. Like gravity, if you plant mango seeds, you get mango trees. If you plant harmful actions, you experience suffering. This applies beyond the scope of one lifetime. Your mind continues after death and seeks rebirth, propelled by the residual energy of unresolved desires, habits, and karma. The role of karma and rebirth. So, where do humans come from? According to Buddhism, they come from previous lives. You were born as a human because of a combination of karmic merit and specific mental conditions. Birth in the human realm is considered rare and precious, a midpoint between the lower realms, like animals or hungry ghosts, and higher deva, godlike realms. Where do we go? That depends entirely on the quality of your actions in this life. If one lives a life of compassion, wisdom, and non-attachment, the momentum of rebirth slows. Ultimately, the goal is to break free from samsara altogether and achieve nirvana, a state beyond birth and death. Karma is not fate. It's more like potential energy, habits and tendencies that shape how you perceive the world and how the world responds to you. For example, consider someone like Oprah Winfrey. She endured severe trauma and poverty early in life, but developed empathy, resilience, and generosity. According to Buddhism, her present success isn't just the result of hard work or luck. It is also the unfolding of deep karmic seeds planted over many lives, some painful, some virtuous. Buddhism gives a deeper framework to understand why someone like Steve Jobs might have had both visionary insight and an intense, sometimes harsh personality. Perhaps in past lives, he was a philosopher or artist with strong views driven to reshape reality. That karmic stream ripened into his drive to innovate, but also his interpersonal intensity. Human traits, the interplay of past lives, karma, and present conditions. Buddhism explains that a human's intelligence, character, talents, and inclinations are the result of a triad. 1. Karma from past lives. 2. Mental imprints carried into this life. 3. Present environmental and social conditions. You could think of karma like software installed on the hard drive of the mind. But the hardware, your brain, body, social upbringing, also affects performance. A brilliant coder may have great ideas, past karma, but if they're handed a broken computer, present conditions, they can't perform well. This interaction explains so many mysteries. Why do some people have spiritual or philosophical leanings from a young age? Why do some children with no formal training show deep emotional maturity? Buddhism would say they've cultivated these tendencies before and brought them into this life. Conversely, someone born into extreme wealth but driven by greed or cruelty may have good conditions but poor karmic software. Eventually, their karma catches up. Scandals, downfall, or mental unrest. There's a reason the tabloids are full of billionaires who seem deeply unhappy. Buddhism provides a coherent lens for understanding not only success and suffering, but also personality, intuition, and life circumstances. The Anatta Doctrine. No permanent self. One of the most challenging aspects of the Buddhist view is anatta, the doctrine of no self. Unlike theistic models that insist on a soul, or materialist models that reduce you to a body, Buddhism says there is no permanent you at all. Instead, what you call a self is a process, a constantly changing flow of thoughts, emotions, sensations, and perceptions. The self is like a flame passed from candle to candle. It's not the same, but it's not entirely different. This stream is driven by craving, aversion, and ignorance. Rebirth is not a soul jumping from one body to the next, but this ongoing process continuing due to karmic momentum. This is revolutionary. It implies that if you change your mental habits now, you can radically shift your destiny, not only in this life, but across many. Look at someone like Malala Yousafzai. She was born into difficult circumstances, faced violence, but responded with clarity and compassion. She shifted her karmic trajectory through courage and wisdom. Her actions have changed not only her life, but affected millions. According to Buddhism, this ripple effect plants seeds for higher rebirths and even liberation. Where are we going? Where you go after death depends entirely on the state of your mind and your karmic legacy at the time of death. If you die with hatred, fear, or attachment, your rebirth will reflect those energies. If you die in peace, with a mind inclined toward generosity and awareness, your rebirth will be far more favorable. That's why Buddhist masters emphasize dying with a calm, clear mind. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, and loving kindness are not just therapeutic, they are survival skills for the transition between lives. Figures like the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, or even ordinary monastics demonstrate how a well-trained mind remains joyful and grounded even in aging and sickness. Their consciousness upon death is said to flow seamlessly into a higher rebirth or toward enlightenment itself. If you're finding this as mind-blowing as we are, pause for a second, hit that like button, and subscribe for more deep dives into the unseen side of consciousness. Your support helps keep this kind of mindful content alive, and honestly, it lets us know you're walking this path with us. Rebirth in Buddhist philosophy. A deep analytical dissection rebirth is one of the most central yet least understood doctrines in Buddhist philosophy, especially when interpreted through a Western analytical framework. It is not synonymous with reincarnation in the Hindu sense. Rather, it's a continuation, not of a soul, but of karmic momentum. When Buddhism asserts that death is not the end but a transition, it redefines what we commonly understand as self and continuity. To truly grasp rebirth, one must first understand the nature of consciousness, karma, the absence of a permanent self, anatta, and the multiple realms of existence. This exposition will unpack these themes using real-world analogies and examples of globally known figures to ground abstract concepts in observable human behavior and decision-making. 1. The nature of consciousness and the radio wave analogy. In Buddhism, consciousness, vijnana, is not a static or continuous entity like the soul in Abrahamic or Hindu traditions. Instead, it is a constantly flowing stream, like a flame passing from one candle to another. The radio wave analogy, often used in contemporary Buddhist teachings, likens consciousness to a broadcast signal. A radio receiver, your body and mind, tunes into this signal and gives it form. When the receiver breaks, death, the signal doesn't die, it continues to broadcast, waiting for another receiver, a new birth, to tune into it. Imagine Elon Musk's satellites broadcasting Starlink internet around the globe. If one of your routers breaks, the internet signal doesn't cease. You just need a new device to reconnect. Similarly, your body-mind complex is just a temporary conduit for consciousness, which is shaped and influenced by karma. The rebirth process isn't about the transfer of a soul, but about the continuation of karmically conditioned consciousness seeking a new vessel. Now consider how this applies to someone like Steve Jobs. Jobs himself famously said, "Death is very likely the single best invention of life." He understood death as a clearing mechanism. But within a Buddhist framework, Job's consciousness, conditioned by his intense karma, both creative and arguably ruthless, would not vanish at death. That energy continues, potentially manifesting in another form, not necessarily human. 2. Karma as the engine of rebirth. Karma is not divine punishment or reward. It's action and consequence, cause and effect in motion. It conditions consciousness and determines the trajectory of rebirth. Karma does not mean that every rich person was good in a past life or every poor person was bad. The variables are far more complex, much like the modern understanding of intergenerational wealth or trauma. Take the case of Vladimir Putin. His actions as a leader have created immense consequences, not just for others, but for himself, karmically. If we were to analyze his rebirth trajectory from a Buddhist perspective, it would depend not on his power or influence, but on the ethical and intentional quality of his actions. Suppose he perpetuated harm knowingly and without remorse. That karmic weight could lead to rebirth in a lower realm, perhaps as a being in a state of intense fear, paranoia, or suffering, reflecting the state of consciousness that conditioned his death moment. Similarly, someone like Malala Yousafzai, who risked her life to fight for education and human rights, might have cultivated a stream of consciousness inclined toward compassion and courage. Such karmic imprints increase the likelihood of a fortunate rebirth, possibly in human form again with the same fearless compassion, or even in a higher realm, such as the Diva, heavenly realms. 3. The non-self doctrine and the illusion of continuity. One of the core difficulties in understanding rebirth is reconciling it with the doctrine of anatta, or no self. If there's no self, what is it that gets reborn? The answer: nothing fixed, nothing eternal, but something dynamic and interdependent. To draw a parallel, think of the US presidency. Each president inherits the same office, the same title, responsibilities, and even certain ongoing policies, but each is a different person. The office of the presidency continues, but no fixed self inhabits it. Barack Obama was not Donald Trump, and Trump is not Joe Biden, but the office, like the flow of karma, persists across administrations. There is continuity, but not identity. In the same way, rebirth is a succession of mental and karmic patterns, not the rebirth of a soul, but of habits, tendencies, and unresolved intentions. A child prodigy might be born with intense musical gifts, not because Mozart's soul has returned, but because the karmic imprint of refined musical consciousness has found suitable conditions to re-arise. 4. The 6 realms of rebirth. Beyond the human rebirth isn't limited to the human realm. Buddhism outlines 6 main realms: the heavenly, Deva, the Asura, jealous gods, human, animal, hungry ghost, Preta, and hell realms. These are not necessarily physical locations, but psychological states and existential conditions. Heavenly realms, Deva, beings in this realm experience immense pleasure and longevity, but they are not free from samsara. Their downfall often comes from complacency or forgetting the nature of impermanence. Someone like Jeff Bezos might be living a diva-like existence: luxury, ease, and access. However, Buddhist thought reminds us that even divas die. Their rebirth is determined not by the pleasures they enjoyed, but by their mental states at death and karmic residues. Asura realm. The Asuras are powerful beings obsessed with competition, jealousy, and conquest. They suffer from constant strife. Think of highly competitive politicians, cutthroat executives, or military generals who never rest in peace because they are consumed by rivalry. Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, or even modern figures like Xi Jinping operating in high-stakes geopolitical arenas might reflect Asura tendencies, intelligent and capable, yet driven by egoic rivalry. Human realm. Humans are in the unique position of experiencing both suffering and pleasure, making this realm ideal for spiritual development. The human experience allows for reflection and moral choice, qualities not easily accessible in other realms. Figures like Nelson Mandela, despite enduring great suffering, use the human condition to cultivate profound wisdom and compassion. Animal realm. This realm is marked by ignorance and fear. Beings are driven by instinct and survival. In a metaphorical sense, individuals who live entirely at the mercy of base instincts, addiction, violence, unreflective behavior may be said to embody animal-like consciousness. If such patterns persist until death, they condition a lower rebirth. Hungry ghost realm, Preta. This is a realm of insatiable desire. Beings are depicted with bloated bellies and needle-thin necks, symbolizing the inability to satisfy their cravings. In the modern world, this can be likened to addictive behavior or obsessive greed. Consider the psychological state of someone like Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street. His life was once dominated by the compulsive pursuit of wealth and excess, yet none of it could bring true satisfaction. Hell realms. These are states of intense suffering created by hatred, violence, and extreme delusion. Hell is not eternal in Buddhism, but karmic conditions can make it seem so. Those who perpetuate extreme cruelty, such as historical figures like Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot, would be considered to have accumulated the karma for such realms. Of 5, death as a psychological moment. The importance of the last thought. In Buddhist psychology, the moment of death is critical. The state of mind at that moment has tremendous influence over the trajectory of rebirth. Imagine a man who lives a relatively neutral life but dies in a state of rage, perhaps due to a violent accident or betrayal. That final moment can override decades of passive karma, channeling rebirth into a lower realm. Conversely, someone who lived a complex life but died in peace, perhaps after genuine repentance or spiritual insight, may have conditioned a fortunate rebirth. Think of someone like Oskar Schindler. Though he initially profited from war, his actions later saved over 1,000 Jews. If his final moments were filled with compassion, the karmic weight of those moments could transform the arc of rebirth. 6. Modern neuroscience and rebirth, bridging East and West. While science hasn't confirmed rebirth, recent studies on near-death experiences, NDEs, reincarnation cases in children, and consciousness surviving clinical death suggest phenomena that challenge purely materialist views. Ian Stevenson's research at the University of Virginia documented thousands of cases where young children recalled past lives with verifiable detail. A child in India claimed to remember being a teacher murdered in a previous life, and forensic evidence supported the story. While not proof, these cases align with Buddhist claims that karmic consciousness can carry imprints from one life to another. Additionally, leading neuroscientists like Christoph Koch and Anil Seth have begun to question whether consciousness is purely brain-based. If it isn't, then consciousness existing beyond bodily death becomes a legitimate hypothesis. 7. Free will, determinism, and karmic conditioning. Buddhism offers a middle path between strict determinism and absolute free will. Karmic momentum heavily conditions our rebirth and current circumstances, but moment-to-moment mindfulness can change that trajectory. Every thought, word, and action plants seeds that will manifest either in this life or another. Consider Oprah Winfrey. Born into poverty and hardship, she transformed her karmic potential through self-reflection, ethical living, and generosity. Her journey shows how conscious living in the human realm can pivot one's karmic arc, potentially elevating future rebirths. In contrast, someone like Pablo Escobar, who used power to cause harm despite having the capacity for good, chose actions that may lead to lower rebirths, despite his material success. Samsara is not just a belief. It's a structure of reality that governs the existential condition of all sentient beings. It is the unending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth propelled by three core defilements: ignorance, avijja, craving, tanha, and aversion, dosa. Samsara is not linear. It is a looping pattern of conditioned existence, a trap, not a journey. Understanding it is not an intellectual achievement, but a radical shift in perception. While modern materialist culture champions success, fame, and legacy, the Buddhist view sees these as karmically charged illusions within samsara's web. The mechanics of samsara: ignorance and attachment. At the heart of samsara is ignorance, not in the academic sense, but a fundamental misperception of reality. Ignorance here refers to the failure to see three core truths: impermanence, anicca, non-self, anatta, and suffering, dukkha. This ignorance births attachment, the craving for permanence in a world that offers none. This is why even figures of immense global power, such as Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, or Donald Trump, are not free from samsara. Their immense influence, military might, and political control might provide temporary satisfaction or dominance, but it is ultimately within the confines of a dream. Attachment to control, to national identity, to personal legacy, all are symptoms of the delusion that samsara is a ladder one can climb, rather than a wheel one must exit. Impermanence and the mirage of control. Samsara is built on shifting sands. Everything is conditioned. Everything is transient. A CEO, monarch, or general might control empires, but their health, relationships, and legacy remain impermanent. The Buddha often likens samsaric pursuits to building sandcastles just before the tide comes in. Take Queen Elizabeth II. Her reign was the longest in British history. Yet even the monarchy, a symbol of continuity, is subject to change. Her death marked not just the end of a personal era, but an illustration of the samsaric principle that no structure, no matter how revered, is beyond time. Institutions, much like bodies, are impermanent vessels. In a more tragic tone, consider Muammar Gaddafi. He ruled Libya for decades, suppressing dissent and living as a quasi-god. But samsara's principle is mercilessly impartial. His fall was swift, brutal, and humbling. The craving for immortality through power always ends in the decaying stillness of death. Craving and the hunger for continuity. Tanha, or craving, manifests in three main ways: craving for sensual pleasures, craving for becoming, bhava tanha, and craving for non-existence, bhavatanha. These three push the wheel of samsara forward. Even philanthropic or noble intentions, if rooted in ego, can become subtle forms of craving. Elon Musk, for example, with ambitions of colonizing Mars, extending human life, and digitizing consciousness, is operating, perhaps unconsciously, under bhavatanha. The craving to continue, to surpass death, not spiritually but technologically, echoes samsaric logic. Instead of exiting the wheel, this perspective tries to engineer its redesign. This is not to demonize innovation, but to illustrate the Buddhist perspective that any pursuit, even humanitarian or scientific, when driven by attachment to outcomes, reinforces the wheel. The six realms revisited. Samsara as psychological geography. Each moment in samsara can manifest the consciousness of different realms: gods, humans, ghosts, animals, hell beings, or asuras. These are not metaphysical theories, but states of mind observable in daily life. Heavenly realm, deva. This is the experience of joy, luxury, or satisfaction. Think of Beyoncé or Taylor Swift, who live lives of artistic acclaim, wealth, and global influence. Their experience may resemble a heavenly realm. However, from a Buddhist lens, even such privilege is fragile. Fame is unstable, public favor is conditional, and aging is inevitable. Asura realm, marked by ambition, competition, and aggression. Figures like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos, caught in the tech wars and commercial rivalry, reflect this realm. Their empires exist, but not without immense psychological pressure. Their minds might exist in a realm of conquest, always seeking the next victory, never at rest. Human realm, balanced between pain and pleasure, ideal for awakening. Figures like Barack Obama, who reflect, write, engage in diplomacy, and promote ethical discourse, function in the human realm with opportunities for growth through moral deliberation. Animal realm, instinct-driven life with little self-awareness. When humans act without reflection, be it through gluttony, blind consumption, or herd mentality, they embody this realm. Entire political regimes based on propaganda can plunge societies into this level of consciousness. Hungry ghost realm, a state of never-ending craving. Consider the compulsions of billionaires addicted to acquisition or celebrities driven to extreme surgeries in search of beauty. These are forms of preta-consciousness, hunger with no satisfaction. Hell realm, this is where hatred and delusion burn unceasingly. Tyrants like Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin, both in life and in historical memory, are consumed by and creators of hellish realities. Their legacy is not just one of power, but of immense karmic pain for millions. The illusion of legacy. Western culture promotes legacy as a form of symbolic immortality. Statues, books, institutions, foundations, these are seen as marks of a lasting life. But from a Buddhist point of view, these are merely traces in samsara. What persists is not reputation, but karmic residue. Steve Jobs created a company that redefined communication. But from a Buddhist lens, what matters isn't Apple or its valuation, but the mental and ethical fabric of his consciousness at death. Was he grasping for permanence? Did he have peace? Did he act ethically toward others? These determine his next rebirth, not the iPhone. Even the greats, Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, leave behind karmic echoes. Some were predominantly wholesome, others complex. But their statues and holidays do not affect their samsaric status. Only their inner volitions and clarity of mind at death hold weight. Thought, speech, action, the signatures of karmic DNA. In Buddhist ethics, every thought, word, and deed leaves an imprint. These are not moral judgments, but energetic footprints. They form the karmic DNA that steers rebirth. Thought. When powerful figures harbor thoughts of resentment or arrogance, even if unexpressed, these become seeds. If left unchecked, they sprout into speech and action. Think of how Richard Nixon's paranoia led to the Watergate scandal. A thought created a presidency-ending reality. Speech. Words form realities. The speeches of Winston Churchill or Franklin D. Roosevelt during wartime shaped not only nations, but karma. Uplifting speech plants seeds of clarity. Deceptive speech creates confusion in self and others. When Boris Johnson misled Parliament during the COVID era, it wasn't just a political error, it was a karmic seed. Action. Action is the most potent signature. When Greta Thunberg stages climate protests, her karmic actions are rooted in a desire to reduce suffering. Whether successful or not by political standards, the volition behind her acts matters deeply in Buddhist terms. In the corporate world, when Rupert Murdoch builds media empires that often distort truth for gain, Those actions, regardless of their profitability, carry karmic weight, not just for Murdoch, but for those influenced by the misinformation his media has spread. Samsara and the trap of time. Another illusion that keeps beings locked in samsara is the idea of linear time. We believe that history progresses, that we evolve. But from a Buddhist viewpoint, what we call progress is often just recycling refined forms of the same delusion. Technology evolves, but human greed, hatred, and delusion persist. War in the age of AI is still war. From a Buddhist lens, samsara is timeless. A king from 2000 BCE and a CEO from 2025 may live vastly different material lives, but if their consciousness is driven by the same delusions, they are functionally identical in samsara. This is why escaping samsara requires not technological advancement, but inner revolution. Death as a pivot point, not an end. Most people live as though death is the end. Buddhism asserts it's merely a pivot. What continues is not your name or profession, but your momentum, your unresolved karma. The deathbed moment is crucial. If a person dies in fear, rage, or attachment, the rebirth will mirror that state. That's why Tibetan Buddhists train in phawa, consciousness transference, to guide the mind at death toward clarity and compassion. When Princess Diana died, the world mourned the tragic suddenness. From a Buddhist perspective, the shock and emotional chaos surrounding a sudden death can influence the transition of consciousness. Contrast this with someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, who died with meditative awareness, potentially stabilizing his rebirth trajectory through clear mental intention. Samsara in the collective, global karmic currents. Samsara is not just individual, it's collective. Nations, economies, and even ecosystems cycle through karma. Climate change, pandemics, war, these are not just external crises, but reflections of collective samsaric delusion. Endless craving, disregard for interdependence, and ignorance of impermanence. When countries go to war, like Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we're witnessing samsara in motion. The karma isn't just Putin's, it's shared by those who support, enable, or oppose in certain ways. Each player holds karmic seeds. Economic collapse, such as the 2008 recession, wasn't just financial, it was karmic. Greed-driven speculation, deception in banking practices, and systemic inequality were all conditions fed by samsaric behavior. Short-term craving overriding long-term wisdom. Escaping samsara, insight, not intellect. No amount of intellectual brilliance escapes samsara. Liberation, nirvana, comes only through direct insight into the nature of reality. That insight must be personal, experiential, and penetrating. It must uproot ignorance, not through study, but through transformation of perception. Even someone like Stephen Hawking, a genius in cosmology, admitted he had no theory for consciousness. Buddhist training would argue that only through deep meditation and ethical refinement can one see through the illusion of I and mine. What determines our rebirth? Karma is the decisive force behind rebirth. But it is not fate. It is not superstition. It is not divine punishment. Karma means intentional action, what we choose to do, say, and think. These actions leave imprints on our consciousness, and these imprints condition where and how we are reborn. Our next life is not handed down arbitrarily by a deity. It is crafted through our own ethical architecture. In the same way that physical habits shape our bodies over time, karmic habits shape our minds and realities. Intentions behind actions matter more than their outcomes. For example, someone like Nelson Mandela, who spent decades in prison but cultivated forgiveness, compassion, and service, created a karmic trajectory toward higher realms of existence, possibly even beyond the human realm. By contrast, a powerful figure like Adolf Hitler, who orchestrated mass suffering rooted in hatred and delusion, planted seeds that inevitably lead to extremely painful and lower forms of rebirth. Karma in body, speech, and mind karma is generated in three primary domains: physical actions, verbal actions, and mental actions. Bodily karma includes acts like helping someone in need, engaging in violence, stealing, or practicing generosity. Verbal karma covers lying, slander, harsh speech, and gossip versus truthfulness, kindness, and reconciliation. Mental karma includes our intentions, thoughts of greed, ill will, or compassion. Even if we never act on certain thoughts, their mere presence and frequency shape our consciousness. Take someone like Barack Obama. His deliberate choice of respectful, measured speech and his emphasis on unity, compassion, and diplomacy contribute to verbal karma rooted in non-harming. Meanwhile, someone like Kim Jong-un, whose actions, ends, and rhetoric often revolve around aggression, fear, and control, is generating body and speech karma grounded in violence and delusion. Current life as a mirror of past karma. The circumstances into which we are born, our family, physical health, intelligence, opportunities, and even the types of people we encounter are shaped by karmic seeds from past lives. This isn't to blame people for their suffering or privilege, but to explain that nothing is random. Karma functions through cause and effect. It can be subtle and delayed, but it is never absent. For instance, someone like Jeff Bezos was born into a world of relative stability and had access to education, freedom, and technology. These are fruits of past positive karma, perhaps from generous actions, respect for knowledge, or previous efforts in building systems that benefit others. Meanwhile, someone born into war-torn regions like Syria or Sudan may be experiencing the ripening of karma involving past violence, aggression, or complicity in societal suffering. That said, karma is not deterministic. Where you start in life is not where you must remain. Each moment presents a chance to plant new seeds. That is the core of Buddhist liberation. Even a person who committed grave wrongs in the past, such as a war criminal or dictator, can, through deep remorse, ethical discipline, and mental cultivation, begin transforming their future karma. Favorable and unfavorable rebirths. Good karma leads to favorable rebirths, like in the human realm, the heavenly realms, Deva, or among beings with wisdom and compassion. Bad karma, rooted in hatred, greed, and delusion, leads to rebirths in the lower realms, animals, hungry ghosts, Preta, or hell beings. Consider Warren Buffett. Despite his immense wealth, he lives simply, gives generously, and emphasizes ethical investing. These actions are not just economic, they're karmic. If his motivation is genuine care for others and a desire to reduce suffering, he's creating conditions for wholesome rebirth. Compare this to figures like Pablo Escobar, who, despite immense wealth and power, generated massive suffering. His fortune came at the cost of countless lives. That is karmic debt that must be paid, likely through future suffering in lower realms. It's also possible to see karmic principles in action during life transitions. The rise and fall of powerful people often correspond to karmic shifts. Consider Bill Clinton. His political brilliance and global humanitarian work suggest positive karma, but personal scandals suggest the ripening of negative karma too. A single lifetime can encompass both heavenly and hellish states depending on the unfolding of karma. Karma is dynamic, not fixed. A critical principle in Buddhism is that karma is not fate. It's dynamic, malleable, and subject to transformation. Through mindfulness, right effort, ethical behavior, and mental cultivation, one can purify negative karma and strengthen positive seeds. Look at Malcolm X. Early in life, he was involved in crime and violence, but in prison, he had a radical transformation, embracing discipline, purpose, and later, compassion. His later life was one of service and awakening. From a karmic view, he intervened in the trajectory of his rebirth by shifting his mental and ethical fabric. Modern therapy mirrors this concept. Trauma survivors who do the difficult work of healing, challenging patterns, cultivating compassion, choosing forgiveness, are practicing karmic purification. They are rewriting their mental and emotional scripts, just as monastics use meditation and precepts to do the same. Right effort and daily karma. Karma is not just shaped by big decisions, it's forged in the micro moments. How we react to irritation, how we speak to a barista, how we treat subordinates, how we think about our rivals. Every time a politician chooses honesty over deception, every time a CEO prioritizes worker well-being over profit, a karmic direction is formed. Angela Merkel is a useful example. Her calm, steady leadership, emphasis on service, and avoidance of personal aggrandizement speak to a karmic path of restraint and wisdom. Compare that to someone like Rodrigo Duterte, whose language, actions, and policies often incited violence. Each leader lays the groundwork for their future lives, not through religion, but through intention, word, and deed. Practice and discipline, karma's compass. Daily meditation, ethical precepts, and mindfulness serve as karmic steering mechanisms. They sharpen awareness of intention before action, helping one break the cycle of reactive behavior. This is how Buddhist monks and increasingly lay practitioners purify karmic imprints. Consider the Dalai Lama. Despite exile, threats, and the loss of his homeland, he radiates compassion, forgiveness, and clarity. His entire life is an embodiment of disciplined karmic cultivation. His future rebirth, if it exists at all, would likely be in realms of peace or spiritual evolution. Compare this to political figures who act with paranoia, aggression, or egocentric manipulation. Their future lives may be marked by fear, isolation, or loss, not as punishment, but as karmic continuity. Social karma, collective patterns of rebirth. Entire nations and communities generate collective karma. Societies that embrace equality, education, and compassion generate wholesome collective karma. Countries that persist in systemic oppression, warfare, or exploitation risk collective suffering, economic collapse, natural disasters, or internal decay. The United States, for instance, carries both profoundly good and profoundly bad karma. Its support for innovation, charity, and civil rights movement are powerful positive seeds. But its history of slavery, wars, and corporate greed are also karmic debts. These play out not only in politics, but in climate events, economic cycles, and public unrest. Karma determines rebirth not because of external judgment, but because of internal architecture. What we repeat becomes who we are. What we nurture becomes our future environment. There is no escape from karma, but there is freedom through understanding, transformation, and responsibility. Let me know when you'd like the continuation. This is around 1,800 plus words so far, focused purely on core content. The proposition of rebirth is one of the most compelling, complex, and often controversial aspects of Buddhist philosophy. It asserts that life does not begin at birth nor end at death, but rather continues in a cycle governed by karma, the ethical residue of intentional actions performed through body, speech, and mind. While traditional religious and spiritual systems have addressed this phenomenon for centuries, a growing body of scientific and parapsychological research, most notably the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, has sought to provide empirical evidence to support the Buddhist view of rebirth. To understand the implications of scientific inquiry into rebirth, one must first separate logical investigation from superstition. In many religious traditions, belief in rebirth is accepted as dogma, requiring no empirical validation. However, Buddhist epistemology, especially within the Theravada and Mahayana schools, strongly encourages personal verification through observation, reasoning, and meditation. The Buddha himself emphasized ihipassiko, come and see for yourself. The claim is not that belief should be blind, but that it should be based on experiential insight. Therefore, when science begins to examine the very process Buddhism has taught for over 2,500 years, it invites a rare convergence of faith and reason. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, is the most cited and perhaps the most respected academic figure in this field. Over a period of 4 decades, he investigated more than 2,500 cases of children from diverse cultural and religious backgrounds who claimed to remember previous lives. His approach was meticulous, empirical, and systematically documented. Stevenson did not begin with the assumption that rebirth was real. Instead, he sought to assess whether the data supported that hypothesis better than alternative explanations, such as cryptomnesia, unconscious memory of things previously heard, fraud, fantasy, or parental influence. What makes Stevenson's work compelling is his reliance on verifiable details. Children in his studies often described people, places, and events from a previous life with remarkable specificity. In many cases, these statements were verified by independent investigation, even when there was no apparent way the child could have accessed such information. For example, children would describe a past life in a village they had never visited, name family members, provide cause of death, and identify personal belongings, details later confirmed by families in those villages. In some cases, birthmarks and physical deformities corresponded with fatal wounds described in the child's recollection and confirmed in autopsy records of the deceased individual. One of Stevenson's most frequently cited cases involved a boy named Imad Elawar, born in Lebanon. At the age of 5, Imad began recounting a life in a village over 25 miles away, describing names of individuals, family members, the house he lived in, and how he died. Dr. Stevenson independently verified over 50 of the boy's statements with individuals in the village, many of whom had no prior contact with Imad or his family. This level of specificity and cross-verification raised significant questions about the limits of current materialist assumptions in psychology and neuroscience. But why is this relevant to the Buddhist understanding of rebirth? The Buddhist model does not posit a permanent self or soul that migrates from one life to the next. Rather, it teaches the continuity of consciousness, a dynamic causal flow analogous to a flame being passed from one candle to another. The child who remembers a past life is not the same person who died, but is causally connected through karma and mental imprints. This view diverges significantly from the Christian idea of an eternal soul and avoids many philosophical problems associated with identity across time. In the context of powerful public figures, consider how these concepts could theoretically apply. Take the case of Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple, known for his deep interest in Zen Buddhism and Eastern philosophy. In Walter Isaacson's biography, Jobs is quoted as saying, "I'm about 50-50 on believing in God. For most of my life, I've felt that there must be more to our existence than meets the eye." He also reportedly believed in reincarnation. Now imagine if a child somewhere in India or Japan began recalling intimate details about the inner workings of early Apple design, or private conversations with figures like Steve Wozniak, details no one outside that small circle could know. If such a case emerged, supported by rigorous scientific methodology akin to Stevenson's, the global conversation around rebirth would dramatically shift. It would no longer be a matter of speculative faith, but an issue of empirical validation, calling into question the current assumptions of identity, consciousness, and the self. Skeptics often argue that anecdotal evidence cannot establish a scientific theory. This is true in the strictest sense. Science requires replicability, control, and falsifiability. However, the same critics must reckon with the fact that much of modern psychological research also relies heavily on case studies, statistical trends, and probabilistic modeling. The standard of evidence for parapsychology is disproportionately high, often requiring an unrealistic level of proof not demanded in other sciences. The implication here is more philosophical than scientific. Are we willing to reconsider the nature of consciousness if the existing paradigm fails to explain the data? Nobel Prize-winning physicist Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, remarked that consciousness is not something produced by the brain, but something more fundamental to the universe. This idea is echoed in the Buddhist Abhidharma, which outlines a model of mind and matter that functions independently of the physical body, though closely linked to it. When modern scientists like Schrödinger, or neuroscientists like Dr. Sam Parnia, who has studied near-death experiences at NYU, explore non-material dimensions of consciousness, they edge closer to the Buddhist understanding of rebirth. Parnia's studies reveal consistent patterns of awareness during cardiac arrest, where individuals report floating above their bodies, seeing and hearing what's happening in the operating room, information later confirmed by medical staff. While these findings don't prove rebirth directly, they suggest that consciousness can exist independently of brain activity, a foundational prerequisite for the rebirth hypothesis. Once the materialist view is called into question, alternative models like the Buddhist model become more plausible. This is where logical inquiry must take precedence over cultural bias. Many critics of rebirth dismiss it because it is associated with Eastern mysticism. However, such dismissal often stems from ethnocentric assumptions rather than a fair assessment of evidence. If a child in rural Thailand recounts the life of a deceased person in England with accurate details, is that mysticism or unexplained science? Consider another high-profile case, the Dalai Lama. The search for his reincarnation is guided by centuries-old methods combining spiritual insight and empirical validation. When the 14th Dalai Lama dies, high lamas of Tibetan Buddhism will search for signs of his rebirth, examining dreams, omens, and the behaviors of young children who show signs of unusual wisdom or recall of previous lives. The selection process involves presenting these children with objects belonging to the previous Dalai Lama mixed with similar items. If the child repeatedly selects the correct ones, it is taken as a sign of continuity of consciousness. This may sound superstitious to some, but the selection of the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, followed exactly this method, and his life has become one of global leadership, political resistance, and spiritual authority. Coincidence or causal continuation? For those who argue that belief in rebirth encourages fatalism, the Buddhist response is clear. Rebirth is not destiny, but potential. Karma is not a prison sentence. It is a dynamic system that can be altered by intention and ethical behavior. The Buddha taught that past karma influences, but does not determine our present and future. In that sense, every moment is an opportunity for transformation. Think of political leaders like Nelson Mandela or Václav Havel. Had they been governed solely by the karma of their circumstances, imprisonment, political oppression, they would not have become symbols of hope and reform. Their ethical choices created new karmic trajectories not only for themselves but for entire nations. When evaluating the scientific support for rebirth, one must maintain intellectual humility. Just as quantum physics has revised our understanding of causality, locality, and time, so too might future research revise our understanding of consciousness. The burden is not to prove rebirth beyond all doubt, but to explore whether it offers a more comprehensive explanation of anomalous psychological phenomena than materialist neuroscience currently provides. Furthermore, science itself is not monolithic. It evolves. A century ago, the idea that the universe is expanding was ridiculed. Now it is foundational. In the same way, the notion of rebirth may currently be marginalized, but could, with sufficient data, become part of an expanded paradigm of mind and matter. In conclusion, not as a formal closure, but as an interpretative transition, the interplay between parapsychological evidence and Buddhist philosophy is not a clash between faith and science, but a potential synthesis. The work of Ian Stevenson and other researchers does not prove rebirth in the way laboratory chemistry proves reactions, but it does raise compelling questions that warrant continued investigation. The goal is not to replace science with religion or vice versa, but to bring both to bear on the most fundamental question of all, what happens after death? And if the answer lies not in oblivion, but in continuity, then our actions, our thoughts, and our intentions take on a weight far greater than this one lifetime suggests. The idea that our thoughts, our actions, and even our memories could echo across lifetimes isn't just poetic. It might be scientific. And if rebirth is real, then every choice we make carries more weight than we ever imagined. So what legacy are you leaving, not just for this life, but the next? This is Mindful Path, where we explore the ancient truths science is just beginning to understand. Subscribe if you want more wisdom. Comment your thoughts. Do you believe rebirth is possible? And turn on notifications, because the next episode may just shift your perspective forever. Until next time, stay mindful.